Thanks to Peter for organising this. I think what he said about them not being this many or that many events in the UK about this topic actually are quite true. I spend a lot of time, or have spent a lot of time, speaking at conferences in all sorts of places, and so few have been in the UK. So I really hope this takes off and we start to get more of a movement and more of an appreciation and a more greater interest in this kind of stuff, because I feel that we are lagging behind a little bit. So it's great to see you all here, and I'm really, really pleased to be speaking. The conversations I've had about this with a few people over the last few weeks, I think people are trying to get different things out of it. So I'm going to cover three areas during the next 25 minutes, half an hour. Lots of photographs, so don't worry about lots of death by PowerPoint or any lots of words. The first one is just putting into context what's actually happening out there in mostly Africa, where most of my work has been. I've been fortunate to be working in development since 1993, so 19 years now. I've been doing quite a lot of work, hospital building, school building, conservation work. And the work we do with technology is really heavily rooted in the reality of life for grassroots non-profits. And having spent a lot of time working with them, I felt myself in a position to appreciate better what their needs were. So talk a little bit about what's happening on the ground with entrepreneurs in Africa mainly, and how businesses and entrepreneurship is springing up around mobile technology. And I think that sets the scene quite well. Then, of course, I'll talk about FrontlineSMS, which is the product that I developed in 2005, and give you a few examples of where that's being used and how it's being used and why I think it's working. And that really is the last bit, just to really share with you a few tips on anyone interested in thinking about designing a tool, designing a platform, or rolling something out, what I think has worked about the approach that we've had. So I'll share that with you as well. I've just come back from Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. I managed to get out before the riots. There was actually a big student protest outside the event on the Wednesday night, protesting about education cuts, and the whole thing got shut down for a while, so it's pretty scary. But the conversations, as you can imagine, at an event like that, 60,000 people passing through over 3 or 4 days. It was big business. It was about bigger, faster, better. It was about the next big thing. It was all very, very exciting and very much looking forward to the future. And it's not always a kind of a pause moment where you think, what can we do today, and how do we go about making things happen today? It's all about what's next. And when we think about innovation, I think we tend to think of these things. iPads have caused a huge amount of excitement in many places. But for me, if you think about international development, thinking about the iPad as a potential tool is probably a little bit too early. It's a little bit too scary. I did see this tweet about 1.5 years ago, which I couldn't help but screen grab, and I've blanked out the person who was doing the talk to avoid embarrassing them. But I found it quite amazing that 1.5 years ago, you think how long iPads have been out, that there were already conversations about how iPads could be used by African farmers. And I maybe one day, yes, maybe never. I would say probably most likely never. But I think it's just an example of let's put the brakes on and have a bit of a reality check when we think about technology and international development, to make sure we don't get too excited by what's next and too excited by the latest and greatest. Because however great it looks from the UK or Washington DC or wherever it might be, the reality in the field for most of the population in the world isn't that. So what's so exciting about this? Well, this is a map of coverage, mobile phone coverage across Africa. It's 2 or 3 years old now. I couldn't get a more recent one. But it's grown quite rapidly. A lot of this has happened in the last 10, 11, 12 years. And I think the reason that it's grown so quickly and why mobile phone coverage has expanded so quickly is because it's been private sector driven. Operators get a really hard time with the amount of profits they make, and they seem to be squeezing the consumer and not delivering value. But this is a private sector initiative, right? If you didn't make money, this wouldn't exist. If mobile phones in Africa or mobile phones for development had been an aid project, it would not have happened. Because it is, the fact that you can make money off it is the incentive to produce this. And what's happened is this coverage is expanded into so many areas that not only the businesses then benefit, but non-profits who are working in those places suddenly find the farmers they've been working with for 15 or 20 years suddenly have a phone. Or the healthcare worker they've been working with for 10 years suddenly has a phone. And that opens up incredible opportunities for non-profits. You then need to think quite carefully about how you take advantage of that opportunity. But it is private sector development, it is capitalism, it is the growth of this and all the money that's involved, which has given us at FrontlineSMS and given Hajo at Text to Change and many, many other organizations the opportunity to do the work that we do. So I'm always sort of slightly defensive when I hear operators being bashed too much. I think we've got a lot to thank them for. So when you travel around and you spend a bit of time on the ground in African countries where I spend most of my time, you see a couple of things happening. And I think they break down quite neatly into formal and sort of informal activity. So if you think about formal, it's like back home here. So you have people in shops with glass cabinets, you buy a phone, you get a receipt, you get a guarantee. It's all done exactly as you'd expect back home. You go to a hotel, you can buy SIM cards, you can buy top-up vouchers, you pay for them normally. It's all very, very exciting and sensible. But on the flip side, you get stuff like this. This is actually some of the pictures being used in the brochure. I took this in 2003. This was a guy in a village outside Johannesburg somewhere who had realized that he could sell mobile phones to his community, so he created his own shop. So he sort of threw this up in half a day and painted the front, and that's his business. Right, now, he probably didn't go on an MBA to do this. He didn't get any manual. He just decided this was an opportunity, and what he did was he created a shop. And we have to bear in mind that it's because of people like him that people in these rural areas have phones. Right? It's not just about Nokia and Android and Apple pushing, and this big marketing machine pushing this stuff in. To get to the very, very bottom of the pyramid, if you like that term, you need to have people on the ground, grassroots businesses and grassroots technicians and grassroots entrepreneurs pushing the technology down. This is a charging station. Again, people buy phones, but they can't keep them powered because they don't have power at home. So you see these everywhere. People walk along, plug their phone in, wait an hour, get a charge, pay 30 shillings, and walk off. Without guys like this, people wouldn't be able to use the phone that they've bought. So again, that's absolutely crucial. Phones are repaired and re-repaired and remade and cannibalized and rebuilt by people like this guy. Someone called Jan Chipchase did some very interesting research on electronics engineering and repairing and fixing among communities in developing countries like this guy. This person probably downloaded a PDF off the internet to explain how a phone is taken apart, but he's learned the rest himself. And you kind of peek into these little shops and you see them with a brick and a piece of wood trying to fix the phone, and they kind of make a few mistakes and they break a few. But ultimately they get it right and they learn a lot. So phones that really have no right to still be alive today are alive because of people like that. This person cycles around, people wave him down, makes a call, pay him, he cycles off. It's a mobile. Right? It's actually taking the mobile phone to where the business is. And I think that's absolutely brilliant, and he's kind of thrown this thing together himself, and he's got a couple of bike batteries there to keep the power going. Again, this is not something that you would expect necessarily to see happening. Four-wheel versions of the same thing. Get lots of these in capital cities. In Nairobi, there's programs for physically disabled people to go around in these vehicles so they can have their own businesses and provide services. You'll notice on this picture, actually, the phone on the thing there is a payphone, but it has a mobile back end to it, so it looks exactly like a BT payphone you'd get in a red phone box in London, but it's actually using the mobile phone network. They're far more rugged, far more reliable, and they're not so easy to steal and run off with either. People selling top-up vouchers on street corners and chargers and all sorts of other things. One of the most amazing stats I ever heard in the last 10 years, I think, in my work was I was working with Grameen, and Ugandan Telecommunications Commission produced a report that summer, this is about 4 years ago. They estimated about 9,000 people worked in the mobile and technology industries in Uganda, so that's computing, mobile, and technology more broadly, about 8,000 or 9,000 people. They estimated the informal sector, so the kind of stuff I've been showing you for the last 5 minutes, the informal sector was about 350,000. So there were 350,000 people figuring out ways of making a living off the back of this technology, and only 8,000 or 9,000 that were officially employed. I think that shows you the importance and the kind of scale of this kind of entrepreneurial activity in these places. There's a book called The Stealth of Nations that's just come out by a guy called Robert Neuwirth, and he actually studies these economies. I think the informal economies around the world are worth tens of trillions of dollars. This is stuff that we think is illegal and often not really above board, but a lot of people stay alive because of it. And this guy charges this car battery up, drags it to the next village to charge it there because they have power. There's no power in his village, so his villagers plug in their phones to charge them up, and they pay the money. Again, that's, I think, a great solution to a business opportunity. And car batteries are very, very heavy. You don't drag car batteries around for fun. And this is a village phone. This is a Grameen model where usually women borrow a small amount of money. They become the village phone operator in their area. People go up, make a call, and pay to do that, or pay to send a text message. I think the interesting thing for me about this picture is that as more and more people own phones in this person's village, she's starting to sell breads and eggs. You see sugar and all sorts of things in the background. So whereas this may have been her business for the whole time originally, she's now having to supplement it with other things because more and more people are having phones. And then finally, manufacturers are starting to think about how phones are seen and how they rethink how they market and promote phones in these markets. This is an advert for a torch. This is a torch that makes phone calls, if you actually read the ad. Right? It's aimed at people who don't have light or power at home and need light to see. So the fact that it's got a light on it is actually more important to people than the fact it can make a call. So torchy is predominantly the words that you read. And you did never see that in the UK. You'd never see that in our part of the world. And I think it's just fascinating that big companies are rethinking how they package up and market products to consumers. And then finally, this is a phone for visually impaired people. There's no screen on it. Probably can't see that too well there, but there's no screen. It's got a braille keypad, and when you press the button, it speaks to you. So it's kind of a niche product, but again, looking at a market which needs to be serviced in a kind of entrepreneurial way. So what does all this mean? Well, this report came out a few years ago from Leonard Waverman. It's sort of one of the main reports, and this, I think, for me, was a takeout statement about the importance of phones. And when you speak to entrepreneurs and you travel around and meet Nigerian businessmen, and you find out really what their phone has done for them, they would use the word revolutionary. I think everything's a revolution these days, right? Twitter revolution, Arab Spring was a Facebook revolution. I think we overuse the word, but when the end users use it, I think it carries a bit of weight. And you know, for me, I think this really does show how revolutionary and the kind of impact that it's had at a personal level for people in the developing world. So what's wrong? Well, I think for me, the development industry spends a lot of time jumping on planes and flying places and doing stuff. And we heard Peter mention at the beginning that, you know, in Haiti and in certain areas, people go in, they set stuff up, and they leave. And I think there's been too much of that. And I think mobile technology gives us a chance not to do that. It gives us a chance to empower people on the ground who are already there to solve the problem, and it doesn't require loads and loads of flights. This kind of goes to the heart of what FrontlineSMS is about for me, and I'll explain what that is in a second. But I was working in Kruger National Park in 2003, 2004, and the Parks Authority were trying to set up an alert system to alert communities about elephants that had broken the fence and were heading to their village. And while speaking to the communities, they said, can we send a message when we see an elephant? And the answer was no, because the National Parks Office was 100 miles away, and they were going to send an alert out when elephants were on the way. But the community actually realised that they would be the first to see it, and they wanted to press that button, but they weren't going to be allowed to. And this made me think about when we provide solutions and tools to people, who actually has control of that, who presses the button, who owns that solution. And I think we do too much top-down stuff where we actually end up being the kind of owners of it, or large international NGOs, and smaller non-profits on the ground don't get given enough stuff to play with and do stuff on their own. And that's really where FrontlineSMS came from. That's what it looks like as a setup, and Amy's got one at the back there as well that you can see. It's just a low-cost laptop with a phone and a cable, and it's described as Outlook for SMS, among other things, but it allows you to drive and run an SMS campaign through this equipment, which is easily available in many of the places where non-profits work. You buy a local SIM card, put some credit on it, plug it into the phone, add your contacts, group them by village, or by trade, or by project, or by gender, or by age, send them all the message, they can reply, and you can start to analyze and do stuff with that data. And the thing that's been really exciting for me about this has been what happens when you give grassroots non-profits the tools to do the work that they really should be doing themselves, because they want to do it. And all sorts of really, really exciting things can happen. And I'll just quickly whiz through some examples. There's loads on the FrontlineSMS website, so I won't dwell on these too much. But election monitoring, increasing numbers of local NGOs in developing countries are monitoring their own elections, because for the first time, the platforms are available to allow them to do that. In 2007, FrontlineSMS's breakthrough use was in the Nigerian presidential elections. It became a big story and got people really, really thinking about how you build tools that can be used by end users. And bear in mind, any SMS can do this, right? It could be Hardware's platform. It doesn't have to be ours. In Zimbabwe, it's being used to send and receive news and information to rural communities who are starved of meaningful news because the government run most of the media. People actually being able to submit information and express an opinion. It might not lead to anything, but it's very, very empowering for them just to be able to say what they think. Drug stockouts in East Africa, one of my favorite projects. Governments denying that there are drug supply problems in the clinics in these areas. This is a crowdsourced project where people couldn't buy essential drugs like antimalarials or diarrhea medication for their children when they were ill. They would send a message in and it would be crowdsourced. So this map actually shows you that these places you cannot get essentially needed drugs. And when you go back to a government or you're lobbying a government and you have visualized data like this, it can be really, really powerful, because if you just send them a spreadsheet or loads of numbers, it doesn't mean anything. I think if the government's denying that there's no drug supply problem in an area, and you look at a map like that, it's really quite hard to say that you disagree. In Afghanistan, the software is being used for field alerts to staff running around, telling them how to avoid Taliban roadblocks and any other sort of security situations, which obviously is vital when you're working in a place like Helmand. In Iraq, as was Iraq, the first independent news agency, are using it to send information around the country, and our software supports Arabic and other scripts, so you can do it in local languages. Anti-trafficking programs, these are local NGOs working within their own communities to try and educate around human trafficking, and these systems are embedded within those communities. They own and run them and decide what the messaging is and how the thing is done. And the software is being used in 3 countries. You can add Haiti now to that list as well. Afghanistan, election monitoring, again, going back to that earlier example, and this has been crowdsourced as well, so news and reports from the election are mapped on that map. Kickstart pumps are using it to get people to express interest in their pumps, so you register an interest via an SMS, and then a salesperson can visit you, or you can be texted when there's a road show in town, or if there's a special offer on a pump. So it's a nice way of keeping in touch with people who are interested in buying your product. And then finally, in Malawi, a friend of mine from back in Stanford days, called Josh Nesbitt, took FrontlineSMS to Malawi and actually used this laptop he bought from a global equivalent of Curry's. And this is Alexander here. He's running a rural healthcare network for 250,000 people through that laptop by communicating with several hundred community healthcare workers. It's quite an amazing project. It cost $3,000. But what actually happened within 6 months, they saved masses of money on fuel by avoiding unnecessary journeys, saved a lot of travel time. This costs $500 a year to run, so it's financially sustainable. And like I say, it costs $3,000 to implement. So this system is having a huge impact on about 250,000 people, and it costs hardly anything. And the point, I think, with this is that you can actually do some really, really quite impactful things without millions of pounds. And again, I think that's the point that's generally overlooked in the technology space, where everyone wants to get 250,000 this and 1 million this, and it's not always that way. Josh's work has since become FrontlineSMS Medic and has now become Medic Mobile, so they're an organisation in their own right doing some really quite amazing things. We also have FrontlineSMS Credit, which has built a microfinance module on top of our platform to allow microfinance organisations to automate the payment and receipts of money to clients who are borrowing, $3 or $4 equivalent potentially. FrontlineSMS Legal is looking to build case management software, so for many people in the world, the law actually doesn't apply to them. They're way beyond the reach of the law or the relevance of the law. They may have land dispute questions or land rights issues. The software will enable them to create a case on a platform using SMS and bring them into the legal system for the first time. FrontlineSMS Learn is looking to extend the reach of education services, and radio, which Amy's been working on the back there for the last year or so with us, is working with community radio stations to have DJs who are sitting doing live broadcasting of health, agriculture, or other programs to be able to interact with the audience in real time via text message while the program's going on, so people can be texting in questions which can then be answered and read out on air. Sounds nothing amazing to us, but for many stations they've never ever been able to do this before, and using very, very cheap equipment, low-cost laptops and phones, for the first time they're able to do it. This is our online community. We're active in about 80 countries. It's been quite staggering how the use of the software has spread purely organically. We've never had any marketing budget or any money to promote it that way. This is the online community where people can go if they can get online and ask questions and help each other out. And that's, for me, one of our biggest achievements, is this community of users that are really, really keen and eager to reach out and self-mobilize around the platform and organize their own local events. I think if you build stuff that empowers people and genuinely empowers people, then they tend to want to get involved at a different level than if you come into something and you try and convince them to use it. So last couple of minutes, very quickly, why does FrontlineSMS work, I think, in my view? We're still learning a lot about it. I think, first of all, when you need to buy things to make it work, everything you need is available locally. You don't have to buy some fancy switch or some high-cost piece of equipment on eBay. You can buy phones, cables, and computers in your country, without any problem. When you see a FrontlineSMS setup, you see a computer, a cable, and a phone. Most people figure out within about 30 seconds that you plug the 3 of them together. There's no IKEA-type instructions to kind of tell you what to do with it. It just makes sense visually, and I think that's really important. The software is free, so we don't charge our users to use it. They pay for their messaging. But the point is that we're trying to lower barriers to entry for non-profits and make it easier for them to deploy tools like this by lowering a technology barrier, but then by putting up a price, you end up still with a barrier. So it's been easier for us just to keep it free and downloadable off the web and let us figure out the sustainability questions. Allowing people to share and talk about what they're doing and then allowing other people to go and do the same is absolutely critical. The hospital in Malawi that was using the work that Josh did, other hospitals came from nearby and asked, we've heard you've got this SMS system. Sounds brilliant, how do we do it? You can actually explain to the other hospital how to do it, download it off the internet, put it on a computer, plug in a phone, put a SIM card, and you've got your own network. If it's, we've got to email Ken, and he'll fly 5 people over, to do a week of training, they'll set it up for you, it'll cost $30,000. It's not going to go anywhere. So people have to see the solution in other people's hands and to be able to see themselves actually deploying it themselves. And the least we can be involved, better. Success for me is us never having to go anywhere and do anything. Forget the internet, going back to the thing about iPads and high-tech stuff. People hate me at tech conferences for saying that. If you build tools that require the internet, you're losing masses of people before you start. In Zimbabwe, internet penetration is about 5%. If you build your tool around the internet, you've lost 95% of people before you start. So that's really, really important. And that's why SMS is such a king in this kind of space. SMS works on every phone, doesn't require internet, and so on. Community, it's really important to allow people to connect and share and to write and help each other and self-mobilize, as I mentioned earlier, and we provided a platform for them to do that. And I think also thinking outside the technology box. This is my favorite cartoon, anthropology cartoon, where the villagers are hiding their VCRs and phones and electrical stuff as the anthropologists arrive. And I think it's important to think outside the technology box. So if you're a technologist, try and look at health and agriculture and other areas. Don't get too siloed. International development is really, really siloed. Health people go to health conferences. Agriculture people go to agriculture conferences. Human rights people go to human rights conferences. Mobile health people go to different conferences than health people. I mean, does that make any sense? I don't think it does. This is a really important book from my university days. This is Small is Beautiful. It's kind of popularized the appropriate technology movement. 1973 it was written, but I think it's really still very applicable today. So Small is Beautiful, E.F. Schumacher, is well worth a read in thinking about how you build things that are locally sustainable and can be locally owned and run without large organizations having to go in and try and take over. And really the last one or two here, non-profit world is incredibly competitive and it bugs the hell out of me. You know, money's short and people have to look better than other people, but you find a lot of squabbling and a lot of fighting, and it's not always good. And the reason I cut this kid in half is because I kind of almost imagine in a village, there's 2 NGOs trying to vaccinate him, and they've both got hold of one arm each, and they're trying to be the one to give him the jab, right? That kind of, for me, sums up some of the stuff that you see, and I think it's really, really important that we remember that we're all trying to really achieve the same thing. Someone told me in Africa recently there's more Save the White Rhino non-profits than there are white rhinos. So something's not right about the non-profit space. And this is my final slide. This is my work in South Africa in 2003. This is women living in Bushbuck Ridge, which straddles Kruger National Park. And this picture really challenges me, and I go back to it really, really often. I think when we're working in the non-profit world and we're trying to think about building technology solutions to solve social problems, we need to make sure that the reality of that solution is embedded in the reality of the people we're trying to help. You look at this, there's no internet, there's no power, these women spend their whole days queuing for water. Life is pretty tough for them. And if we can think about ways of genuinely empowering and building tools that help these women, I think we're onto something. But if we start doing it just for fun, or because it's cool, or because we get to travel a lot, or because we get to use the latest technology, I think we're kind of slipping away from the really main focus, which should be how do we apply ICT for D in areas like that. So I'll leave it at that. That's probably about half an hour, maybe a little bit over.